Our opening thought comes from Toni Morrison from the work Conversations. She writes, "The enemy is not men. The enemy is the concept of patriarchy, the concept of patriarchy as the way to run the world or do things." Our next reading comes from Bell Hooks, from her work, Feminism is for Everybody, Passionate Politics. In a culture which holds the two-parent patriarchal family in higher esteem than any other arrangement, all children feel emotionally insecure when their family does not measure up to the standard. A utopian vision of the patriarchal family remains intact despite all the evidence which proves that the well-being of children is no more secure in the dysfunctional male-headed household than in the dysfunctional female-headed household. Children need to be raised in loving environments. Whenever domination is present, love is lacking. Loving parents, be they single or coupled, gay or straight, headed by females or males, are more likely to raise healthy, happy children with sound self-esteem. In future feminist movement, we need to work harder to show parents the ways ending sexism positively changes family life. Feminist movement is pro-family. Ending patriarchal domination of children by men or women is the only way to make the family a place where children can be safe, where they can be free, where they can know love. Our next reading is also from Bell Hooks, from The Will to Change Men, Masculinity, and Love. To create loving men, we must love males. Loving maleness is different from praising and rewarding males for living up to sexist-defined notions of male identity. Caring about men because of what they do for us is not the same as loving males for simply being. When we love maleness, we extend our love whether males are performing or not. Performance is different from simply being. In patriarchal culture, males are not allowed simply to be who they are and to glory in their unique identity. Their value is always determined by what they do. In an anti-patriarchal culture, males do not have to prove their value and worth. They know from birth that simply being gives them value, the right to be cherished and loved. There seem to be a lot of self-proclaimed manly men telling the rest of us what it means to be a good man or a good woman in our society. Their vision for men is for men to always express power and control and to not show any form of weakness or what they perceive to be feminine characteristics. In their minds, men should be the leaders of the family and strong leaders in the domains of business and politics. Women who agree with this vision of men may to a certain extent share in some of this patriarchal power as long as they agree that their bodies are ultimately controlled by men and that their primary value comes from having children. Nothing screams patriarchy louder than equating the primary value of women with having children. What does it say about persons who constantly hearken back to the 1950s as the good old days, when that was a time when black people's voting rights were not protected, communities and schools were segregated, and women had no control over their own bodies in all of the states of the United States and could not even get credit in their own name. The self-proclaimed gatekeepers of manliness and masculinity are not really protecting masculinity. They are protecting patriarchal practices and structures that they believe perpetuate their power within society. And they're right. It does perpetuate their power within society. The purveyors of patriarchy are incensed about transgender persons and non-binary persons because they think that they are the only ones who should define what gender is and how it should be expressed. They act like someone having preferred pronouns is something akin to the 7 deadly sins. They know that if they give up their perceived power and control over gender roles and identities, it is one more brick knocked out of the wall of patriarchy. And yes, I was thinking about a certain Pink Floyd song when I wrote that last sentence. To borrow a little more from Pink Floyd, we don't need no patriarchy. I'm increasingly convinced that efforts to continue discrimination against our LGBTQIA+ siblings are much more about perpetuating patriarchy than they are about any deeply held religious convictions. And religion is simply used as an excuse or justification for continued discrimination. If your primary use of religion is to restrict the freedom of others and exercise power and control over their lives, you are doing it wrong. Sadly, though, so much religion is used to justify the perpetuation of patriarchy. Just because the authors of religious mythology lived in and were influenced by patriarchal cultures does not mean that patriarchy is divinely intended. And just an FYI, nowhere is Jesus portrayed in the Gospels as saying the inherent worth of a person or their value to the community is related to having children. Plenty of patriarchal Christian nationalists say this, but Jesus never did. When persons conform to the expectations of cultural patriarchy for their self-understanding and self-expression, they are losing opportunities for the full expression of their freedom, for the full expression of their personhood. With a massive gender gap in both economics and politics, patriarchy is not only holding us back as individuals, it is keeping us from becoming a fully free and flourishing society. As a country, the United States is ranked 43rd in the world in relation to gender equality in pay. 43rd in the world. Among states, Texas is ranked 34th, and Oklahoma is ranked 37th nationally when it comes to a gender gap in pay. Both are ranked lower when it comes to overall quality of life for women in those states, in our states. And in relation to political representation, we know that the United States has fallen behind most established democracies with respect to women's representation in politics. Women remain underrepresented at the federal, state, and local levels, according to the Carnegie Endowment. When women run for office in the United States, here's something that's interesting. When women do run for office in the United States, they are elected at a similar rate as in other established democracies. But fewer women in the United States are actually running for office as compared to the other established democracies. We know from experience and seeing it in other settings that election reforms like public financing of elections and ranked choice voting have proven to increase gender equality in political representation. But surprise, surprise, as a nation, we have failed to embrace such reforms as we cling to patriarchy. It's not an accident that the most vibrant democracies in the world are also, you guessed it, the least patriarchal countries in the world. The happiest, healthiest, most educated, least corrupt, and most democratic countries in the world are also the least patriarchal. And it should be noted, though, that the purveyors of patriarchy are quite willing to switch to more autocratic political methods of control as it becomes more difficult to perpetuate patriarchy through democratic means. So much of patriarchy is about money and power. Ever notice how patriarchal the oligarchs of the world are? The billionaires of the world, only 12.5% of the billionaires in the world are women, and a very high percentage of those persons have inherited their wealth rather than having made it on their own. Patriarchy and oligarchy are both about concentrating power and wealth in the hands of a few. So much of our politics is simply about rich men on power trips wanting to become richer men with even more power. We see this very clearly today, don't we? The evidence is clear. Patriarchy is a problem. Patriarchy is the enemy of a free and flourishing democracy, and countries that are shedding their patriarchy are far better off than those who are clinging to patriarchy. So, in conclusion, and once again borrowing a few words and a sentiment from Pink Floyd, with apologies to the grammar police in the room and online, we don't need no patriarchy. May we all find ways to take another brick out of the wall of patriarchy. So be it. Our closing thought comes from Elizabeth Lesser. Recognition of the harm that patriarchy has caused to people and the planet does not mean that men are wrong and women are right. Rather, it is a call for new organizational forms and for relishing gender differences within a context of equality.